did not see her join yet. Dale Cook?
Here.
Thank you, Dale. Steve Fensky? Did not see Steve. Steve Georgie?
Present.
Good morning, Steve. Jason Hollanday? Mark Johnson?
Good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Bernadine Joslin?
Morning.
Morning, Bernadine. Brian Crambier?
Good morning.
Morning, Brian. Teresa Sunday?
I'm here.
Thank you, Teresa. Jim Wykeham?
Morning.
Morning, Jim. Paul Wirtz? Dave Wolf?
Good morning.
Micah Myers indicated he would not be attending. He's in travel status today, but I'll go back. Yvonne Carabo? Steve Fensky? Jason Hollanday? Paul Wirtz. They're probably just up. They're probably just late.
Okay, no worries. We'll just keep an eye on them and see as they there's Paul. We'll just keep an eye on them and make sure they're here. And if we do get to a vote later on, kind of we'll do one more pass if they're available. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Again, we'll have a good meeting today. Scott's done some wonderful work late last week, taking all the feedback on the third draft document, and now all that has been incorporated into a fourth draft document that was sent out late Friday night. So again, Scott, thanks for the patience and the dedication to really work late on Friday to get that in. Hopefully all of you have had a chance to look at that fourth draft. And what we'll do this morning is really just walk through the document, not into extensive detail because I think you've had a chance to look at it, but we'll just kind of walk through sort of the body of the work. There is one area, most suggestions and changes that were submitted were very constructive and really good to make a more robust document. And really there's only one area of conflict, or at least it's, in my mind, it's not really a conflict, it's something we have to kind of get an alignment on how we want to talk about it. And we'll kind of point that out in the discussion, and we actually leave that for the end. So at the beginning, what we'll do is walk through sort of the entire document, skip the area where there's a little bit of a discussion that needs to be had, finish all of it, and then we'll come back to that spot and really have a discussion there and see if we can get alignment on how we want to present this report, and see if we can get kind of alignment and then voting on that one. So that'll be that's the most of the discussion today. I'll kind of let Diane or Angie kind of speak up to see if there's anything from Office of Broadband Development to begin with, just a quick update. And if not, then I'll turn it over to Scott, and we'll just dive right into the report. Before we get going, any other thing anyone from the task force wants to make sure we cover or have time for today? All right, hearing none. Diane, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, great. We do need to vote on the minutes from the December 3rd meeting. Just an update quick from our office. We do have two new staff people that will be joining us in January, so that'll be great to have additional resources on board. And then we also have had all of the October map and data updated from the Connected Nation update that they gathered in October. And I think I mentioned last time our number of unserved households went from 150,000 to 171,000 based on the latest data, which includes service area data from Charter Spectrum and location-based data from CenturyLink. Other than that, I think that's kind of the update for now. We're still monitoring capital projects funding, monitoring Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding, which NTIA is administering.
Okay.
Did the application go in, Diane, for the capital projects funding?
Diane?
Yep.
Diane,
I was going
to
to you. Yep.
It was just submitted moments ago. So we have a digital signature, and but everything is at Treasury. Minnesota requested the full amount of its allocation. So we'll be waiting for next steps from Treasury. Our understanding is that as of yet, Treasury hasn't approved any of the submittals. But with the deadline coming up so quickly here, I'm hoping with the great team that they have there that we will hear back from them early next year. So
Awesome. That's great news, Angie, and great to hear that. Step one. That's a good step one. Any other questions for Angie or Diane? Okay, and before we turn it over to Scott, as Diane reminded us, we need to vote on the minutes. The minutes were attached. Do we have any questions, comments, or concerns on the meetings that were submitted? All right, hearing none, we'll mark those as approved, and we can post those, Diane. So.
Okay.
All right, so turning to the meet here, Scott, I know Diane, maybe you'll share your screen, and then Scott, you'll keep track of any kind of comments that come up, but also sort of walk us through the document. Again, this is the fourth draft, and hopefully all of you had a chance to look it over the weekend and maybe even this morning. I know we had a pass at it this morning, so with that, Scott, I'll turn it over to you, and you can just sort of walk us through where we are right now.
Fantastic. Well, I would like to first echo Teddy's comments. It was very, very appreciative. I'm very appreciative and grateful for all of you who submitted very thorough comments. It was clear that you took the time to go through the document from top to bottom with very crisp and good suggestions. All of them that I received were reviewed, and I tried to respond back to every single person individually with notes that indicated, what changes were made relative to the comments that you submitted. So you should see 99% of those reflected in this last draft of the document. So again, thank you to everybody who offered those up. The only thing we haven't had an opportunity yet to fully complete on a great suggestion to try to make sure art is accessible for those who have impairments, and we'll be taking a final pass once any adjustments are made on the voted document to make it accessible. We're doing research on how much of that can be preserved going from the Google slide format that it's in currently to the PDF format once it's ready for publishing. So that, again, is the last step as we prepare for getting this ready to go out the door at the end of the month. So if there aren't any specific comments as we start at the top, our intention is to, as Teddy indicated, just go through quickly slide by slide, and if there are any final updates that people have seen in this last draft that they would like to point out, I'll be making note of those as we go through. So I think we could go to slide 3, Diane, which is the first introduction. There were a couple minor word changes in the introduction and the executive summary. So the next slide where there were some adjustments major would be on 5. So here we added the comparative goals, and the distinction that I think Diane made for clarification is that the statute doesn't speak to any particular kind of technology, so that's why that first paragraph there in this slide just references the speed goals as the statute states. Doesn't indicate any particular kind of preference around technology, although the Office of Broadband works on the B2B grant program with wireline. Diane, any comments of clarification you'd like to add there?
No, I think it's clear now. It was in the earlier draft, it made it sound like wireline was a part of the definition in statute. So I think this clarifies it. And we have our maps that focus on wireline service because if you don't have a wired service, then you're eligible for the grant program. And so that's why we mostly post the wired maps.
Got it. And I am only seeing a limited subset of faces, Diane, so that's why if I ask you a question, I can't see if you're nodding or shaking your head, so thank you for piping in. Let's go to number 6, please. The next one up.
And sorry, Scott, as Scott's going through this, if you have any question or concern, just raise the hand and I'll call on you then.
Thank you, Teddy. So all of the slides now have numbered connections between the challenges and the recommendations, and there were a few adjustments based on comments that were shared where the order changed. The slides were shifted based on the last conversation so that the unserved and underserved area slide came first in the key challenges, so those are things that you should have noticed. And then we'll get to a point where there may be a recommendation or two that doesn't have a number next to it, and that's because there wasn't a challenge that was identified that closely correlated with that recommendation. So if you see a paragraph that is missing a number, that's the reason for that. Any questions or comments on this slide? If not, we can go to 7. Go ahead, Steve.
Steve, you're on mute.
I'm looking at number 1 on the previous slide, and I just get concerned that so many legislators are not truly up to speed on broadband and the funding streams and sources, etc. And so, you know, number 1, decision to allocate funds from the capital budgets project or capital project budget. It seems to me like it would almost be important to include that application was submitted December 20th, 2021. You know, it's implied, but again, I talk to my local legislators and they're just amazed at the information I provide them that they're unaware of. So they're not putting it together that because they allocated $70 million that nothing's going to happen. So I'm just throwing that out there. I know you want to kind of keep things limited to a bullet point, but I don't know that this means much to a lot of legislators. And providing that extra detail to get the message across might be important. So that's just my thought.
Teddy, this is something I neglected to ask you earlier. I think there's an opportunity, Steve, for the accompanying letter from the chair to maybe draw some attention to a couple of those things that might need a little bit more emphasis. And that would be an opportunity, I think, to touch on that point and draw some connections between, you know, we do now have this key challenge directly aligned with the recommendation slide that goes along with it, but I would agree that it could use some more emphasis, so maybe Teddy can put that into his cover letter.
Yeah, we could do that, but also I think, Steve, what we could, Scott, what we could do is we could put that in appendix, right? The letter, and we can reference it here, right? So that way you have the reference, and that letter goes into a lot more detail. So, and again, we in the cover letter as we send the overall report in, we can re-emphasize that a little bit better too. Steve, will that work?
Well, yeah, I think that'll help because again, a lot of this stuff doesn't mean too much, but I think that would help. So thank you.
Yep. Okay.
All right, on to the next one, Diane. A couple of these bullet points were reworded, particularly the last one, 2.6. So hopefully all the suggestions that were made there have made the document better. Any comments on this one?
Quick comment here, Teddy, on me.
Yes, go ahead, Brian.
On 2.3, I mean, there have been some people that have been, I'll just say, successful and are going to deliver on the RDOF. So I was just wondering if we wanted to say that under 2.3, Rural Development Opportunity Funds, RDOF, designated areas potentially in dispute or yet approved can slow or block. Because, I mean, some of the RDOF stuff is going forward successfully, but I don't know. Maybe it's clarity that we don't need. So I just threw that out there.
Would you repeat that language that you added there, Brian?
Yeah, under 2.3,
Yep.
it talked about RDOF,
Yep.
designated areas that are in dispute or yet approved, have slowed or blocked other viable development projects. Because I think there are some people in the state that have successfully received the RDOF dollars and are going forward. But there are others that are in dispute and haven't delivered with the FCC on the information. So those are the areas that I think are in question.
Okay.
Got it.
Yvonne, you had a comment. I don't know if it's related or so.
It is. That I was wondering, that one to me seems like it belongs on the previous slide as a reason for a delay or, an impediment versus an inaccuracy of mapping and speed measurement item.
Yeah, it's a good overall point, Yvonne, that I have organized these around where they came from out of the subgroups. And so I think we might find today that there are some places now that people have had multiple opportunities to look at the document where that seems to make more sense for it to be in one place or another. But they've all landed where they are based on where they came from in terms of the subgroups work.
Sure. That makes perfect sense of why they're where they are, but I'm thinking of it just from the legislator reading it point of view. What are these categories that were being given for the key challenges?
Yep.
So as a suggestion to move it to 6, we can do that. Okay. So the suggestion is move that to slide 6 and then also add in or yet approved.
Yep.
Okay.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, we can move to 8 then. Any questions or comments here? Thank you, Yvonne, for the language updates on 3.3.
Scott, this is Diane. Under 3.3, do you want to spell out 1? It kind of blends in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just noticing that now. Sure can. Done. All right.
Yvonne, was your hand up from earlier, or I can put it down? Okay. Okay.
All right, next slide. Continuation of this section now, education and coordination. number of improvements in language for clarification here on this slide. Hopefully that made it easier for folks who had those comments. Any additional comments or questions?
Steve Fensky has a question or comment.
Yeah, I just sent an email on this on 3.7. If we could just take out the lack capacity and change to have not coordinated, because there are counties, cities, and towns that are coordinating. So I don't know that they lack capacity. It's some that aren't maybe doing that, but I don't know what would prevent them from that kind of activity.
It's a good point, Steve. I'm curious about whether you are also suggesting that every county, city, or township does have the capacity, meaning they have the person power to move ahead with coordination. Seems as though that came up quite a bit, that there are a lot of volunteers, half, etc.
I think they could if they wanted to. Some will choose not to, but there's already none of these are an island, right? They all work together in some way. They may not be working on broadband together, but they work on roads, they work on infrastructure contexts.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Georgie has a comment probably on this. Steve?
Well, it's my experience up here. We have so many townships in St. Louis County and unorganized townships. And they certainly do lack the capacity. County services are going to be limited. Yeah, certainly on roads, but when it comes to securing the ARP funds, we have multiple counties that didn't even apply because it's so hard to communicate with them. We have townships, that are 10 miles from the city of Virginia, don't have an email. Rams is communicating with them on the phone, in person, and they don't have an email system for their township. So the township board, the township clerk, pretty difficult to get this information to them. So I think it is counties and cities may feel a little offended if we lump them in there, but I know a lot of townships that just don't have the capacity to follow through.
So it sounds like it could be a both and situation where some lack capacity and some are choosing not to coordinate.
Bernadine?
Thanks, Teddy. Yeah, Steve, I think maybe also part of where this came from was the data that was shared with us from the Lead for Minnesota presentation that resulted from those, the 300 people that participated in those regional conferences. We really did hear from those people that they needed help, that they lacked capacity to access and manage those funds and do the deals they needed to do. Maybe there's a way to put this like necessary capacity or adequate capacity or something. But I would echo Steve that in my experience in the street, that it really does require a level of knowledge, skills, and time and energy that are not adequate for townships and counties to fully make the best advantage of the opportunity coming. That's my impression.
Mark Johnson?
Yeah, thanks, Teddy. And I would agree with both Steve and Bernadine that there, in our area, we certainly see townships and some smaller cities, that are designated as cities that just, and Steve, I certainly understand what you say. They do, right? They do collaborate on roads and bridges and all, and many other things. But this particular key challenge, does say they lack that ability to maximize opportunity to reach more unserved populations. In other words, in the broadband arena, they just don't have, they sometimes don't know what they don't know in some respects. That's all.
Okay, Steve Fensky?
It's a little bit the harshness of lack capacity, I guess, as a word. Lack resources, that was one I just heard. Lack time, I think there's other ways to say it. Also, Steve, I think you mentioned unorganized townships. So to dispel something, an unorganized township isn't a government at all. It's just a unit of measurement. The county is the government there. So you're right, they wouldn't have capacity because they're not like your organized townships. Just to clarify there.
How about, I like what you said, how about lack resources? Would that suffice for everyone? Because that's also time.
Yes.
Steve, Bernadine, Mark, would that lack resources instead of lack capacity? Would that? That's what we're saying, I think, right?
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, I can live with that. They need help. I think there's a number of them that need assistance.
Well, that would be a positive way. Another way to reframe it is just to say need help. Need help to coordinate the use of their ARP dollars for broadband.
Okay, yep. Yeah, how about we do that? Need help.
Got it. Super.
I'm smiling, Steve Fensky, because I'm wondering if that's less harsh. Townships need help or townships lack capacity.
Yeah, less harsh.
All right, then I think we are going to slide into the recommendation section, and as Teddy indicated, we're going to skip over 11 and 12 for now and go right to 13. These are related to access, affordability, and education. We got some more specific information from the Lead from Minnesota program, so that has been added into that slide now. Any questions or comments on this one?
Georgie has a comment.
I'm just wondering, when we ask or make a statement, provide funding in this report universally, if we shouldn't say provide base funding. Because that's what we've been trying to do since I've been on here anyway, is convince the legislature and the governor that we need to have base funding for broadband in the legislative, bills, rather than begging, borrowing, and stealing going forward. So just throwing it out there that wherever you see provide funding, it should be base funding.
Is that a specific distinction that legislators understand, or is that a common parlance for what other offices would receive? Just want to make sure if we're going to add that language, that it's actually language that legislators know what it means.
Yeah, I think they would know what it means, Scott. But the only comment, Steve, I'd have on that is I don't disagree. But if we do that, we'll have to be more thorough about how, especially in this area, not the other pieces around the structure and the border to border and all that, but it's the accessibility, affordability, and education. What would base funding in this space look like? I think we'll have to outline that some more. That's something we can certainly do in 2022. to say, okay, and that's something that's going to come, right? So let's say we do achieve a certain level of availability of internet. Well, then you have to have access, affordability, and be able to leverage it, and that could go, potentially should go into the base budget. But how does that look? I'll outline that.
Well, if I could just, again, the last funding bill included, I believe, a separate provision for $375,000 of funding for the Office of Broadband. So I think the legislators understand the distinction of base level funding. And again, that's the whole intent. So now we're asking for, again, some additional programs here, some additional positions from, even the Department of Ed. It's not one-time funding that we can steal from somewhere. It's base level funding to support those types of things.
Mark?
Yep. Yeah, thanks, Teddy. And I agree in concept with that. I think base funding, one-time funding for some of these kinds of programs doesn't do us a lot, because it maybe just gets a program off the ground, especially if you're talking about, well, like you said, the position, with the Department of Education, or the, giving the Office of Broadband money to work on digital, equity kinds of things. It doesn't do a whole lot, because you're just going to get a program started and then you have to go back and ask for it again. I will say though, Teddy, I kind of get, and for everybody, and Steve, I get what you're saying about this might be a 2022 thing, because granted, while there will probably be a supplemental budget, this year, given the amount of funding there, it's not technically a funding year, and sometimes it's hard to get those base numbers into a supplemental bill than it is when it's a full funding year. I'll just my experience in working on some things.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then the other piece is, if we did put base funding, are we saying the TEA should be part of the base funding? If it's the Department of Education with the E-rate, what's the base funding for that, right? Or is it, that's why I say, like, okay, I think if I saw a recommendation in the future, it would say we need this much in base funding, and it should go into the following areas with this much appropriated. So it's like a continuous, right? But again, I think you captured it. Steve Fensky?
I think one advantage of saying base funding is that we would not have ended up with the problem of this year where the money didn't actually get appropriated and used. Base funding would be a general fund appropriation, and so we would not be relying on a federal outside source necessarily if you said some amount of base funding. And Teddy, wherever you put that, whether you include certain things in the base funding request or just blanket all of it, but I think that would be one advantage to saying base funding.
And I think we do have that in the we'll come back to the to slide 11 and 12. Okay, any more discussion on this? So I think where we're landing is the base funding. We'll definitely talk about that in the infrastructure funding in 11 and 12. In the access, affordability, and education area, these are some of the recommendations we're making now. But my thought would be we will include base funding, not for the things we have here for the moment, but I think that's something. Even to Mark's point, as we get into a budget year, that's exactly the time where we ask for base funding for access, affordability, and education.
Super. All right. The next slide, Diane, is a link.
Hang on. Yvonne has a comment.
Okay.
I just had a quick one. I'd mentioned the American Connection Corps was part of what Benya referenced in her letter to support the fourth point there. Was there a reason why we decided not to use that?
Use We used her
language
numbers.
calling it the American Connection Corps instead of just Lead for Minnesota Broadband, American Connection Corps and Lead for America.
I see. I didn't pick that
I
part
was just
up.
wondering if that was a, yeah. Because that's how she identified it in her letter, so I just want to make sure they could see that connection between the letter and the point there. It's a minor thing, but just thought I'd bring it up.
Got it. I'll go back and take a look at that, Yvonne.
Okay, thanks.
All right, this table references some of the previous recommendations and their progress, and Diane indicated that we could add our 2020. There was not a report in 2019, so we will go in and add the 5 recommendations in 2020. And if I recall, Diane, you indicated that one of them was acted upon the budget resolution for the 375 or whatever over the 2 years was 700 or 750.
700 over the biennium.
Got it. Were there any of the other 5 2020 recommendations that had some action on them?
The task force recommended 120 million for the border-to-border grant program over the biennium, and it was the 70 million.
Got it. That's right.
So
that'll get added into this table for 2020. Any other questions or comments on the table?
Steve George has a comment.
I'm going to apologize for beating a dead horse, but I think this is a glaring example of how the need for base funding should be in the report, because anywhere it's requested, it uses.
You went back on mute. Nope, he's on mute again.
I think this table reflects very clearly that where base funding was requested or continuous funding for various programs, the legislature didn't act on it. So I don't care what year it is. I think every year the task force should be recommending base funding for everything related to broadband. I'm going to quit.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, so that was the link you just showed, right? If you linked to
Yes.
that. Okay.
Yep, that's the table that comes up. So slide 15 is the economic impact of broadband. We had a suggestion to add a little bit more diversity in the quotes that we have here. So that top bubble is going to have a quote from Lead for Minnesota, Banya Kraus, and that would be pulled from her letter and or from something that she provides us yet today or tomorrow. Reached out to her already.
What slide was that?
That's slide 15, the one we're looking at here. Currently has 2 Land O'Lakes references, and so that top one would come from Lead for Minnesota and reference the work that they're doing. Any suggestions or comments or questions on that slide? If not, we can go to the next one.
Hey,
Oh, there's
Scott.
one from Teresa. Yes, go ahead, Teresa.
Yeah, I just noticed that they weren't numbered after page 14. 15, 16, 17, and 18 don't have the numbers.
Good catch.
Just
Yeah,
a
check.
like thing. Thank you.
Yeah. right. Any questions on this slide? There was a question that came up about citing, and so there were some updates made to the resources page in the appendix so that it's more clear where the reports and references are specific to some of these things. So, and again, I'll put that invitation out to anybody who thinks they might have a report or a reference that would be useful to add into the appendix. Happy to still take those. All right, we can go on to the updates then to the next slide was 17, interagency cooperation coordination. Didn't hear any other suggestions, so this slide did not change. Right, we can go to 18 then. This slide also did not change. And the next 4 slides are updates to stats and so forth. Diane pointed out this morning that the 184 number should be 171. These numbers were calculated from a table that was provided to us, and so some of those extrapolations didn't come out exactly right, and hence that number has been changed already from 184 to the 171. Any comments on any of the, or questions on any of the stat slides? That's all new in this latest revision, so if anybody thinks there are other things that should be clarified or numbers that should be adjusted, this would be a good time to mention them.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. You and I have been in touch about rural comparisons here. I'd ask that we include rural metro comparisons to show percentages because it's so overwhelmingly rural. And you asked for some help in finding those, so I can work on that. But I would like to see that we give our audience that detail that shows the rural metro comparisons here.
And is that something that you think you can assist on pretty quickly, or know who could?
Yes.
Great.
Scott, this is Diane. We have rural numbers on our website.
Ah, good. Okay.
So I can get you those.
That would be fantastic. Easily added. Any other questions or comments on the stats?
And
right.
Scott, this is Diane. Just for clarity, so folks know what they're going to be voting on, the rural stats will mirror these same numbers, but just have the percent rural? Okay.
Exactly. Yep. And we'll try to reuse some of the local photos too. I noticed that we didn't get all of the stock photos changed out, but it's way more interesting with the local photos. Thanks for that, Diane. Everything else in the appendix section got updated based on people's comments, so title changes, etc., on task force members. The technology updates that were offered got made as well. So I think if you want to look at slide 25 and 26 to see if there's still anything that could be clarified relative to any of those items on 25 or 26. Again, thanks to everybody for your suggestions on these. And then the remaining slides are reference slides, maps, and reports, and referenced documents. If anybody thinks that there are some additional definitions that should be added for sake of helping legislators or other audience members understand key things, the list could be very, very long because there were much longer lists in previous reports, so I was trying to just grab the high-level things. But there's room for some more if people think there's something important that should be included there.
Could we look at slide 26 again, please?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if anybody wanted me to go to a different slide, to let me know. Thanks, Bernadine.
Yeah.
So I do have a comment on 26 under satellite.
Mhm.
I would like to include the point about affordability as a barrier or a challenge. The language that I had suggestion is something around like one critical question is affordability. There is now a $500 equipment installation fee. Monthly subscription is $100. That would be a barrier for many families. So the point about affordability is one, and then the other point that isn't in here that I'd hoped we could talk about is the sustainability. So the fact that the low Earth orbit satellite networks is estimated that about 20% of them will need to be replaced each year so that it can't be considered infrastructure.
Yeah, I think that the question of affordability is really broader than just satellite, and that's, I think, maybe something we could accentuate in the opening paragraph, because it really applies to all of the technologies. And if there's something that we want to add to that section under key challenges that points that out additionally, that would be another place to highlight that.
Scott, that makes sense. I take your point. I think that's true that maybe, and we can, as we think, I'm not sure where we address affordability as a challenge, but I take your point about that. That does leave the concern about sustainability and scalability as a solution for, relying on satellites as a solution for rural because of the replacement and you guys remember when we saw that presentation and they showed that hairnet of how many satellites it's going to take to do this around the globe. So I just want to make sure that we're giving our we know this is a tender point in the policy discussion of Minnesota, and that we give an accurate picture of the challenges of this relying on this technology as a solution.
Steve Georgie?
Yeah, I have some of the concerns that Bernadine has mentioned too. The sentence in here about 3/4 of the way down. These systems, like all systems, have their challenges, and users are discovering some of those now during beta testing. I think if we ended the paragraph with that sentence, it'd be acceptable to me. But adding the sentence, but as more satellites are deployed, coverage speeds and reliability will improve and may serve to address some of the major gaps in coverage land-based providers have today. That's a real pause for concern for me. Knowing what I've read about the systems, they're not going to cover globally. They're targeted for specific geographic areas. Weather is not mentioned. Anybody that has DirecTV or Dish knows how storms and weather impact satellite coverage. So I have a real problem speculating that it's going to improve and cover those major gaps. I think that's a real slippery slope for us at this point in time with this technology. I'd like to see that sentence eliminated.
Hallwards?
Yeah, just as a point of declaration, AT&T has no interest in residential satellite business, so I'll just put that out there. We seem to have this debate every year. I'm just a little uncomfortable where we, I think, kind of breach the technology neutral when we get into this satellite language. You know, if somebody is unserved, you know, I mean, I'm looking right now at Hughes Internet. You can get a plan for $40 a month. Not everybody that's unserved or underserved is low income. You know, there are a lot of people living up in northern Minnesota, I'm sure, in, you know, several $100,000 cabins or, you know, recreational homes. It just seemed, you know, we're not talking about state broadband dollars being used for satellite. The technology clearly, from when I started on this task force to where we are today, has gotten better. And, you know, for those people who choose to live there, this could be considered either a gap solution or, you know, an alternative solution compared to, you know, what they might pay with another provider. They could be years in, you know, unless we get, you know, the unserved total served, it could be years in the offing. So, you know, what's the definition of affordability? You know, I don't know, you know, just to say that somebody's in an unserved or underserved and they can't afford satellite. I mean, I'll show you my broadband bill right now, right outside the Twin Cities, and it's not cheap.
Okay, Paul, should we change anything then? Is that, or?
No, because I like that, you know, whether they will be affordable you know, I kind of like it just the way it is. You know, I just don't see a reason. You know, we all know, you know, these things change, technology improves, but no one's, you know, I know we've had these comments about Representative Garofalo that he made, I will say, 2 legislative sessions ago, not recently. But, you know, no one's calling for state broadband dollars to be used in the deployment of satellite as a residential solution. So I just think it needs to be presented as these are the current, you know, we can't hide from it. It is being advertised, it's being deployed. And, you know, whether or not someone on the other end makes that decision that that's what they're going to use, I think we need to leave that up to the consumer. We're not advocating from a policy standpoint that this, you know, be part of the broadband grant program. It is what it is. It is a form of high-speed internet.
Okay. Steve, how about Steve Georgie, what if we removed the word major? Instead of saying some of the major gaps, just say some of the gaps in coverage. Does that make a difference?
Well, I think, you know, if I'm reading this report, it's saying that the task force believes that it's going to improve reliability and so forth. And I don't know why we're speculating on what low orbiting satellite systems are going to be in a few years. We know that through the testing right now, the beta testing, that people have identified issues. So that's a factual statement. The next sentence to me is all speculation at this point. So I don't know why it's in there. And I don't disagree agree with some of the statements Paul is making, that there are people who can afford to use satellite systems, good, bad, or indifferent. But, I also know they have to be on the north side of the lake, because on the south shore, they're not going to get a signal if they have any trees in their lot. So it's a very, very limited and geographical application, and we all are cognizant of that. I just think that's a speculative statement that it's going to be so wonderful. And I've heard Representative Garofalo this year already talk about low orbiting satellites being the solution to broadband connectivity in Minnesota this year.
Yeah.
So
I get it, but I don't think that.
That's
Steve, there's no speculation in here that says we think it's going to be wonderful. What we could say is, if you want to make it more factual, but as more satellites are deployed, coverage, speed, and reliability have improved. That's true. They have improved compared to they were. Still not great, but they have improved. It may serve to address some of the gaps in coverage land-based providers have today. Or we could remove that last part of the sentence. We're not saying it's a replacement. I don't read it. I mean, I don't read it as like this is going to be the next solution to broadband issues. I mean, not at all.
Yeah, I think that's a good change, Teddy, to have improved.
They have improved, and we can remove the second part of that sentence, right? Because that's, again, we say they may not. So. And then the last sentence is, it's kind of factual. So, Steve,
I'm just a little lost about, you guys are talking about different places, but I don't know what language is being talked about here. What to remove and what to keep. And I do see a little bit of the speculation, and for me, the hold the promise, kind of that's saying, well, it should do this, and I don't know if that's correct. Maybe if we have something we've done this year that we can put in numbers, of what is happening right now, what's there, then we could say, here's what we were told, here's what we found in our work about what this provides right now. So what language are we talking about? And I do see Steve's point about it seems to look to the future about what it will do, and I'm not sure will.
Yeah, Steve, so I think what we're just saying is change it to, but as more satellites are deployed, coverage, speed, and reliability have improved. Stop there. And then say whether they'll be affordable for a typical underserved or unserved user is not yet clear. Remove all the speculation out of it. Yvonne?
Oops. I just wanted to circle back to Bernadine's point, and I made a suggestion in the chat about just a small change to the ending sentence. Whether they will be affordable and sustainable is not yet clear.
Okay.
That's easy.
Okay, yep.
Got those.
Other comments?
Can you go back to slide 11 then?
Yeah.
Excuse me, Scott.
Yeah.
I had talked about having a slide about where we were at our goal attainment. Was that slide added? Did you take that suggestion? I can't really see. How we talk about here are our goals. We have our speed goals and we have our leadership goals. And then I think that's on slide 5.
Yes,
is our goals.
We added
and then
the 5.
Suggested that.
The comparative goals were added to slide 5. Correct.
Yeah. And then after that, is there a slide that shows where we are at on our goals? maybe that suggestion didn't somehow was not, you didn't notice that, but I would like to see that we say what our goals are, and then I think the task force should report how we're doing on both sets of goals, our speed goals and our comparative leadership goals.
So those comparative goals, do we have a place where that information is kept? And if so, then it could be among those changes that are added in the stat slides when we put the rural information in there.
Yeah, and I was actually suggesting that after, so we have a slide 5, I believe it is,
Yep.
that lists our goals, our
Yep.
speed goals. There we are. Yeah, here we go. So here we are. Here's our recap of our goals. And then a new slide 6 or slide 5 plus after this, would show how we're doing. And it would show what percentage of households in rural and non-rural have speeds at these goals. And then it would show on those comparative goals, our leadership goals, how are we doing? Are we in the top 5 for those 3? That we're report. I think this is our job as a task force, is to let this legislature know how we're doing, very foundationally in terms of our statutory goals. So that's my suggestion, that we, and I thought I'd sent that to you in writing, that we add a slide now that would mirror this one after this and show how we're doing on these goals, leadership and speed, showing metro and non-metro.
Got it. That's doable. Presuming that we have the data for the comparative goals.
Yeah, and I've sent you some sources on that. It's not as straightforward, but there are different sources to cite.
Got it. I will take another look at that.
We can put some links in the comparative, Scott. I think the more important one is how are we doing? That should have.
Okay, got that note.
Teddy, I would say I agree with Bernadine. That's probably the most critical benchmark. When the legislature looks at what the broadband grant program is doing, and we're going to look at the potential of $180 million coming in to fund this thing over the next several years, there's got to be some yardstick as to where are those dollars going. I think we did, 20 million the last time we had a broadband grant, and we got 7,000 unserved. So, let's see where that yardstick takes us with 180 million. And then, if at the end of the day, we're not quite there yet, that certainly, gives the argument we need to keep funding the program, or we need to do something else. So they've got to have that. That's probably the most critical conversation at a legislative hearing. Where are we? Where are we going? What do we need to do to get to the ultimate goal?
Okay. Yep. We'll add that slide. It'll be a slide after this one.
Yep.
Okay. Let's go to 12 real quick, actually. So there's 2 things on this slide, and then we'll come back to 11. One is I wanted to make sure we had a clarification on one part, which is the second paragraph on this one. It says the legislator should amend the governing statute, says which one that is, to allow OBD to take into account or accommodate in its grant cycle the anticipated significant supply chain delays related to network construction. So on this one, we wanted to make sure we clarify. I think Diane and Angie, I know you can speak up, but the Office of Broadband Development today, you do have the leeway to accommodate for delays, right? Or no? Like maybe we can clarify what the issue is today.
This is Diane. When we prepare the contracts, we allow them 2 full construction seasons. The funding doesn't expire. It stays in our grant fund, so we can extend the contracts if there's a good reason. That's with state funding. Now, federal funding obviously will come with federal requirements as to whether the state has to expend all the funding by a certain date or whether that's open-ended. But right now we do have the flexibility. There was just one year, it was either the first or second year, the appropriation actually did have an expiration date where if we didn't spend it, it went back to the general fund. But in the other 5 years, it didn't. It just stays in the fund. And so if we have excess, then we award it in another grant round.
So the question is, do we need this recommendation given that the office has flexibility to manage extenuating circumstances?
Brian Cranbier?
I would say we could take it out, but I think it's important to note maybe in one of the challenges that providers are going to be faced with shortages and delays in equipment just as part of the challenge in delivering broadband.
Suggestion? Other thoughts from others? Bernadine?
Thanks, Teddy. I just have a question of clarification, please, for, where am I looking here? So where it says 2.1-2.3, that last section, Minnesota should continue to invest in improving broadband maps, strive to achieve ISP coordination, producing address level or shapefile broadband maps. So my question is, are those different things? Address, I think Teresa sent us that little clip that showed a shapefile. So, are we, I think the original recommendation was that that Minnesota should strive towards address level broadband maps. And I'd like to hold on to that recommendation. I think, but so I just wanted to invite the task force to notice that and maybe talk about it. What do people think? Are we okay with the shapefile as our goal, or are in our mapping subgroup we talk quite a bit about address level as being where we need to get to?
Teresa?
Our industry is using shape files. We believe that they're a better solution than address level, and we're just going to leave it at that. I believe having "or" in this sentence makes sense.
Bernadine, I mean, are you okay with the language there? I mean, the shape files do get down to the address level in general.
Yes, they do.
I mean,
And they're
shape files
easier to manage too. They're easier for us to manage too.
Yeah, I mean, if a provider could provide shape files, that's actually what they should do.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernadine.
Okay, so it doesn't sound like there's any issues removing that second paragraph, but Brian, I get your point. We should include supply chain issues in the challenges, so we'll make sure that it gets updated there. Unless there's any other comments or disagreements there, move on to the next point, which is now the first paragraph. Now this is where we have some little bit of a clarification needed between this and the previous slide. So number one thing I wanted to hear from the group is this first paragraph sounds like it's around funding and how funding should be allocated by OBD. The previous slide talks about funding. So the goal here is, can we move this recommendation to the previous slide and then incorporate it with something else there? So two pieces, but first I want to say, does everybody agree that we move this to the previous slide around where it's all around funding? Is that okay? I'm not seeing any disagreement. So, but let's remember the language here and we'll toggle back and forth, right? So what it says here is legislators should require full projects funded by OBD grant dollars be capable of 100 megabits per second download and 100 megabits per second upload at the time of deployment, irrespective of whether or not a provider offers a service package of 100 by 100, and meet network reliability requirements in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Okay, so that's the recommendation that says OBD should grant dollars for networks that go in at 100, capable of 100 by 100. All right, Diane, if we go to the previous one. Okay, here, just keep that in mind. We have the $180 million from ARPA, make that available. But we applied for it now. Let's make it all available to border to border. I don't think we have any issues there. All grants funds should be first focused on unserved areas, 171,000 households, and the unserved and underserved should not change at the moment in time. I think we're okay with those two. Didn't hear too many disagreements last time. So now we get into geographic considerations should be prioritized when allocating broadband grant funds.
Teddy, excuse me. Teddy, excuse me. So I would like to talk about 1.2 and 1.3, and my suggestion here is that instead of saying all grant funds should first be focused, that we say grant funds should first be focused. I think that there is a lot of benefit that grants should be first be focused. Still keeps us laser focused on unserved without restricting OBD from doing the kind of deals they're going to need to do to maybe reach unserved. I see a cost of adding the word all, and I don't see a benefit. So my suggestion is that we eliminate the word all, and it would read grant funds should first be focused.
Okay. I don't. Teresa?
I agree with that. I had that in my notes to strike the word all as well. So thanks, Bernadine.
Okay. If you have any disagreements, let us know, but that makes sense. Okay, the first two, good. Now, geographic considerations should be prioritized when allocating broadband grant funds. A one-size-fits-all grant allocation will not secure service in areas of the state where a fiber or cable optic option is difficult or impossible. Any issues with that first part? Okay, now there's more detail. Steve Fensky?
Prioritized. I'm not sure why we had prioritized, and I know I've seen this, but I don't remember why we had said that. I would say considered, but when I see prioritized, I think that's going to be more important than other aspects. And I'm not. I don't want to be prioritized on where on the map it is. In my opinion, it's what's the need, and I think there's other factors that face that. So I would propose changing this to considered as opposed to prioritized.
Comments on that? Steve Georgie?
Perhaps the better word is factored.
Sure.
Okay, so factored. Okay, make that change. Okay, now we get into the 3 points, and maybe the one from before is another sub-point under this one. We can talk through that. So what's there right now is unserved areas of the state that are difficult to reach due to low density, tough geography, etc., should receive a higher % of funding match from OBD to increase build-out options. If necessary, the 100 megabits per second synchronous requirement should be waived to allow OBD to work with providers to deliver the best services possible by any technological means available. If a provider is delivering service under a waiver of the 100 megabits per second synchronous requirement, the contribution from OBD grant program should be reduced to account for any reductions of installation costs and reduction in value compared to service providers who are meeting the 100 megabits per second synchronous requirement. So if we were to bring the one from the next slide in, it would probably be in maybe the second point, making the second point here the third one, because then they will sort of start to line up where you have the 100 megabits per second synchronous requirement, and then you say, well, in case it can't be met, then OBD has the ability to waive it, et cetera, et cetera. You could read that. That would be a way to start to align them a little bit better with one another. And I don't know if it's difficult for people to see, and Scott, we could potentially try to share what that looks like, right?
I did copy the legislation or the language from the previous slide into the chat, so people want to use that as a reference as to what that language from the previous slide is.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So if you put the chat open, that would go as sub-bullet number 2 there. Oh, now I have to chat. Let's see. Mark?
Yeah, so I don't know how to verbalize this exactly, but it just doesn't, to me, make sense. In a sense, we're like asking for one thing, but then saying, well, but then maybe not, which doesn't seem to be, I mean, it's like we're not taking a stand on a recommendation. You know, we certainly understanding that there are areas that are difficult to reach, and so we say they may need a 60% or a 70% grant piece versus a 30 or 40% local match. But then we go later and say, but if we waive this synchronous requirement, we have to lower that amount. So now you're talking about perhaps going to the same areas that are hard to reach, but when we say they could have a higher percent of funding match, but then, well, maybe they shouldn't because it's not a technology that can do synchronous. So there's just a lot of, these don't agree with each other in my mind. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Mark.
So I was going to say, I mean, because really, when we took that other statement from page 12 and moved it in here, that statement is just really saying we're changing the term scalable to capable. In other words, instead of being scalable to 100 by 100, we're saying it has to be capable of 100 by 100. But then again, in here, then we say, but we may need to waive that requirement. They don't fit together in my mind.
Oh,
and maybe that's just me.
Yeah, no, so there's a little bit, and so that's why I had to really spend some time thinking about this, right? They are a little bit conflicting, but they're not conflicting to the level of, the question's going to be, like, let's see this play out, right? So you have an area that's hard to reach, and that there's not a lot of deployment there. If we say you can only get funding if you deploy 100 by 100, that means that area is going to have to wait for a provider that's willing to provide 100 by 100. Till then, nothing is going to happen in that area, right? And so the question is going to be, are we going to wait? Are those areas going to wait 6, 7, 8 years before finally somebody says, okay, now I can finally do it? Or could you get something there sooner if somebody was willing to do something less than 100 by 100? How do you describe that? But we want 100 by 100. That's what we want. All Minnesotans should have that. I don't think there's any disagreement from anybody there. The question becomes, in the hard to reach areas, do we wait for that or do we do something different? That was really the question, right? And maybe there's a better way to frame it, but that was the intent, I think. So Bernadine?
Thank you, Teddy. I totally there about the conundrum, and I understand the intention here. But necessary, unnecessary. I mean, it's all a question of political will. And I would agree with Mark that by allowing, we've made a notice that it may require more funding from the state, a higher percentage. And that's the solution here, in my mind. I cannot get behind a recommendation that would essentially establish a second-class citizenship service environment for rural. And Teddy, to your point, if you invest that, the question here is public dollars. Is it okay? Is it conscionable to invest public dollars in a system that today doesn't meet our standards? And if you invest those dollars today, it's going to be even less likely that they get the broadband they need in the future. And the whole thing about deemed necessary, it's just it's very, lack of transparency about who decides under what conditions what's necessary. This is a political will question. It's our opportunity as a task force to say what the standard should be. We need one Minnesota, and I cannot get behind a recommendation that would allow public dollars. Because what is the technology we're talking about that can't be synchronous? It's DSL, right? That's really the topic here, DSL. Because wireless, fiber, they can deliver those speeds. And I just don't think it's a good use of public resources to spend tax dollars on systems that aren't good enough today, won't be good enough tomorrow. And then once that's been built, those areas are never going to get new funding to build what they really need for the future. This is really problematic for me.
Steve Fensky?
I put in some of this stuff in our subgroup because we had the discussion in our subgroup and in some of our meetings about areas that were just really difficult to install wireline service. And Bernadine, I think you're right. You could just throw money at it, but I don't know if everybody's going to, and the legislature is going to throw money at some of these places. So what I was trying to do is make an option where, and it depends on what's necessary, how that's defined. But in certain places, if you're going through rock, it's not going to be very feasible to get a wire line in some places. Is there an option to change something here? So that was the category where I said, okay, if they're going to put in something less than wireline, they should also get less money because it should be cheaper to install. And it shouldn't have the same barriers that wireline does. Mark, I see your point. And what I'd propose then is in the first dash that we add probably under maybe after from OBD or just before it, 4 wireline projects. So we say the only way you're getting more than 50% is for a wireline project. And I think that will preserve that higher percentage for wireline projects. Whether the group wants to add the waiver, I can go either way.
Thanks, Steve. Mark Johnson?
Yeah, I'm trying to process that. Thanks, Steve, for that suggestion. I think there's something there that would work. But overall, I'm still with Bernadine that, if we want 100 synchronous and we want to say that the project have to be capable of delivering that, which is, again, it's a change from scalable to capable, right, in how we define things right now, then, we say that. And I would say then we just keep that along with that first one about, and maybe with the modified language a little bit, about the wireline receiving a higher percentage of funding match from OBD. And the other ones at that point just don't make sense with it, because then legislators are going to grasp onto that and say, well, then why don't you just do this? Or you don't need this because you'll just do this instead, kind of a thing. So, yeah. And then I did throw in the chat, what about aerial, an aerial fiber solution in places where you can't bury it? Just an idea or thought.
Thanks, Mark. Steve Georgie?
Yeah, I can concur with Steve Fensky on wireline getting a higher percentage. I just want to share that, as difficult as it is up here in northeastern Minnesota with our bedrock, there are companies that are willing to do installations through bedrock. The Northeast Service Co-op had to extend middle mile fiber up to townships around Lake Vermilion, which is solid bedrock, and they worked with Lake Country Power. It was cheaper to do the boring than it was to go overhead and replace all of their poles and install poles in a bedrock situation. But we are looking, we certainly hope at some point in time Lake Country might be able to help us with overhead installation. And the other point is, we're recommending that we allocate additional federal dollars for these projects, and then we're, right below that, offering waivers for lower services. And again, I think with Mark Johnson, it's just a conflict. And I agree with the higher percentage and adding wireline in there. I think that hits the nail on the head. But like Bernadine said, it's a will here, political will to do the right thing with public dollars the first time and not have to go back. So that's where I'm at.
Steve Fensky, and you have your hand up again.
I was going to say, then let's split these questions. The first would be, do we put in you get a higher percentage for places that are hard to reach with wireline? And then no matter what the group does with the second question about a waiver, you've said you only get this increase if you're doing a wireline service. They're really independent of each other.
Yeah. So that would be just changed to the first one, right?
Right.
They're difficult to reach. Yeah. So if you do a wireline, so we'll put that. So for the first bullet, we'll put that in. I think there's alignment on that. Everybody agree? Okay. So bullet 1 is fine. So then you have now the 3 other bullets, which is the second would have been the one in the chat. The legislature should require all future projects funded by OBD grants to be capable of 100 download, 100 upload, irrespective of what the provider offers, and meet network reliability and infrastructure, blah, 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 etc. So does everybody agree to that? Okay. So now the real question is if the last 2 bullets, which are the 2 and 3 here, is should there be a waiver or not a waiver? Because it's really that second one, because the third one goes along with that one. So that's the one we're saying, let's strike these 2 out of here. Thoughts? Yvonne?
I'd like to keep 2 in there. I think one of the things that we want to be careful of is not to tie OBD's hands too much, and I think it allows an option for them to make a call. So I think it's a good thing to keep. Personally, I don't think we need the 3rd bullet point.
The 3rd one on here on the screen? Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Got it. So let's get more alignment. So first we're saying let's just remove the very last bullet. That one is not required. There's been more hands up here. Steve Fensky?
I like the 3rd one because I think if you're going to offer less, then OBD should be able to provide less on the match. And it incentivizes those who are going to do the full 100 that way. So you may be able to get some money, but maybe it's going to be less than the 50% match. And that might be enough to get somebody to do that project in the place that's necessary. We're really talking about small places here. It should be. If we're defining necessary in a way of, do you really have real barriers to putting in wireline? We have few places. And then it's a matter of, well, what's even possible there? This should be a very small carve out, the way that I think it should work.
Okay. So what we're saying is 50-50 today. If you're doing wireline, you might be able to get more than 50%, especially if you're in a tough area. If you're doing what you're suggesting, Steve, is if you're not doing the 100 by 100, then it's got to be even less than 50%.
I'm saying it could be.
Yeah.
What's necessary, because we're saying what's needed to get the infrastructure in. It shouldn't be a windfall. And if wireless is so much cheaper, which is something we hear about, do they need the 50% match? Okay. And I think OBD could have the flexibility to decide that.
Okay. So Steve clarified that. So again, we're debating whether the 2nd and 3rd sub-bullet on the screen should stay or should not stay. And then obviously Steve clarified that a little bit. Mark.
So I'm going to stand on the side of, I think the 2nd and 3rd on the screen currently should go, given the change that was made to the first one, and coupled with a couple of things. Number one, because we're talking about things that say if necessary and if, whatever, that again, who makes that call? Does that get called into question, and does that cause us any issues with providers, and things like that? So that's one. And 2 is because the new 2nd bullet that doesn't appear on the screen talks about 100 by 100 capable. And we always had 100 by 100 scalable in the rules anyway. I feel like that's backtracking, and then we're not, and I'll bring out my education thing again, then we're no longer talking about all Minnesotans getting a level of service with public dollars. Here ends my comments.
Okay. Bernadine?
Thank you, Teddy. I support Mark's suggestion that we take out the opportunity for a waiver. And Yvonne, I hear you about, earlier in the meeting I spoke on behalf of preserving flexibility for OBD, but this is not that. This is a principle of public policy, and our job as a task force to establish standards for the state for border to border. And I just am really, I just don't think it's conscionable to spend taxpayer dollars on infrastructure that doesn't meet state goals. So I support Mark's recommendation.
Maybe Diane could offer some clarification here. Isn't it true that you do currently have the flexibility to offer less than a 50-50 match if you, in your mind, believe that the provider should need to bring more to the table?
We have awarded applications where they have come in with less than a 50-50 match. We give extra points if they come in with less than the 50-50. We cannot by law award more than 50% of the eligible costs, and we are capped at 5 million, which, given what we're seeing other states do, is going to be a tremendous barrier, I think, to large projects.
So in other words, you can make those decisions to offer less than the 50% match, given your current structure.
Yes, we can award less than a 50%.
I heard Diane say that maybe the 5 million is something we should be addressing.
Yeah, so that was going to be my second point, Bernadine.
That maybe we should. That's if that's a big barrier. That's where we're at right now. Let's go there.
Well, it could be added to bullet 1, where that is mentioned as part of the recommendation, that in cases where a higher percent of funding and there's a recommendation to change that cap.
We're going to see much larger projects, particularly now. My company is no exception in the states where we're the local provider. In Indiana, for example, I think that there's a $40 million project we're working on with a community there. So I think if we want to be getting the state prepared to have providers do some bigger projects, we might need to address that 5 million issue.
So before going there, though, we have clarity now from Diane that there is openness to be able to do without a waiver less than 50%.
Okay. So that the last one out.
On the second bullet point, perhaps keep it, but add the possibility of, if necessary, the 100 megabit synchronous requirement should be waived, blah, 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 blah. And then at the end, as long as it is within our the legislative speed goals. For example, if someone was able to provide 100 by 20, which is within our goal, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how we can show this so that we would not speak. Yvonne? Sorry, got that part. Yep. Brian, go ahead. I'm gonna try to share something soon.
Yeah, I was just going to address the $5 million, just to ask Diane a question that in looking at the applications the last few years, a way for organizations to get around that is they do multiple projects. I've seen some that have 2 or 3, so I would defer back to you if you think that's a necessary recommendation or if we can continue to operate where we're at.
Well, this is Diane, and this is me speaking personally. When we were awarded funding from the state of 20 million or 35 million, even a $5 million cap on a project made sense. If we're looking at the volume of dollars, potentially, if we had to do 108, let's say the legislature decided all 180 million should go into the border-to-border grant program, and we were going to push that out in 2 or even 3 rounds, a $5 million cap can dissuade a provider, I think, from moving ahead with a project that might only make sense if you're going to do the whole area they want to do. So because the cap has been in place in law, applicants have abided by that. If we're starting to look at significantly more funding, and maybe this is something the task force looks at during 2022 to decide whether the cap should be revised. But if those dollars that we're going to grant out grow, we may want to look at bigger projects. Virginia just awarded over $700 million, and I think they had a couple of $100 million awards in there.
Wow.
Jeez.
Thanks, Diane.
Steve Porgy?
Yeah, I would strongly support increasing the cap. Waiting another year, we're going to lose 2022 as a construction season the way it is, unless a miracle happens and they, Office of Broadband gets funds that they can start doing grant applications for early in the year. So, again, for us to push something off when the handwriting's on the wall at $5 million is no longer significant. Doesn't mean they have to give a $10 million grant or better, but it gives them that opportunity for a larger project. The other issue, or the other point I'd like to make is if we had the RDOF map up, I think you'd see that a lot of the geographically challenged areas in the state are RDOF identified. And that's supposed to be significant broadband, basically fiber. So I am not supportive of a waiver or anything less than what we currently are allowing. These areas are going to get served. The other thing is, my other concern is if we allow the Office of Broadband to fund a project less than, the 100, are they ever going to get funding again? Because how many areas have been voided from grant applications because of supposedly federal funding programs in the past? And that's a real concern that I have. We heard that. Concerned that they would get some service at this point in time, but they would never get the service they actually wanted. They got grant funding now. So.
Okay.
Teddy, this is Diane. And maybe, I know this is the whole 5 million cap is a new idea, but maybe under 1.1 and 1.3, you could add a sentence in there that if the total 180 million is allocated to the Office of Broadband, then the Office of Broadband should be given flexibility.
Good idea.
To increase the cap of a project awarded over the, waive that $5 million cap.
Okay. Let me share my screen real quick, and then I put the thing together to make sure we're aligned, and you guys can help me change the language there. Let me know when you're able to see it.
Got it.
Yes. Okay. Good. You'll have to help me if somebody is speaking because I can't see them now. Okay, so that subsection now, what we have it is, there's 4, not 3. Geographic considerations should be factored, not prioritized. When allocating broadband grant funds or one size fits all, et cetera, I think we're all aligned on that. Unserved areas of the state that are difficult to reach due to low density, tough geography, et cetera, should receive a higher percentage of funding match from OBD to increase build-out options for wireline solutions. I think we're aligned on that. We said legislators should require a full projects funded by OBD grant dollars to be capable of 100 by 100 at the time of deployment, irrespective of what the provider offers, and meet network reliability requirements in the Infrastructure Investment and Job Act. I think we were good on that one too. So the 2 bottom ones were these ones. We had said today OBD does have the flexibility, et cetera. So we said let's remove the 4th one. And I think where now is here. And I think Diane, you just suggested something here. Right?
I suggested something in the first paragraph on slide 11, where it says the total 180 million capital projects budget allocated to Minnesota from the federal ARPA fund should be allocated to OBD for funding the border-to-border broadband program over the next 2 to 3 years to help attain broadband service for all Minnesota residents. If the entire 180 million is allocated for the border-to-border grant program, OBD should also be given the flexibility to waive the $5 million cap currently in statute, something like that. I think a $5 million cap makes sense if we're looking at a round of 20 or maybe even 35 million, because that would be 7 projects with a $5 million cap. But if you're starting to talk about larger dollars, then the cap should increase.
Okay, let me bring it all in. Staying up here. So should we change that up here or is that somewhere else?
Yeah, I think that's a good place for it, Teddy, but I think we could actually weave what Diane is suggesting into the first sentence so that we don't have to increase the length of it. And then Yvonne's suggestion was in that 3rd bullet under the section we were working on before, that we tie it to the current state goals of 120 so that it would, any waiver would be limited to whatever the current state goals are.
Okay, so how would that read? I mean, let me just write it out. So I don't know if you had already written down, Scott.
No, but I think instead of should, it would be could be waived to allow OBD to work with providers to deliver services in alignment with, but by any technical means available, so long as they comply with current state goals or meet current state goals.
Agreed.
Teddy, I'm going to just take this opportunity to say that I am not able to support a waiver. So these, making details about the when necessary and stuff, I think the accommodation about raising the cap and allowing a greater percentage for difficult to addresses the concern that Steve has brought to us. And believe me, I'm very aware of the need for people that are unserved today. How are we going to meet their needs? But I think we're doing a disservice by allowing tax dollars to be spent on infrastructure that doesn't meet the need and then puts those communities in a disadvantage to get the funding in the future they need for the broadband they need. So I, in principle, am opposed to allowing a waiver.
And I'm just going to jump in. This is Mark. I would concur, and I had put it in the chat. It pains me in a way because I have an area of the state that has incredible numbers of unserved households. But if they got just marginally better service, that doesn't solve the problem for them.
Steve Fensky?
This is a question for OBD maybe, but is there, it's expected to be enough projects in the next year that this change wouldn't really matter in the next year and there's more time to consider it? Or do we need more projects? And this is one reason we're expanding the language potentially.
Well, this is Diane. You know, when we had our grant round in 2016, where we had 35 million, I think we had enough projects to fund. I think there is so much interest now that we won't have a problem getting good, really good applications for the 70 million that's been allocated to date. Everyone's being told this is your chance. And with the local fiscal recovery funds available to match, we're really going to see those areas that are super interested and willing to put local dollars into the match. So I'm not worried about getting enough good projects.
Okay, then maybe this just is too early for this one.
Okay, so
There's details, we're trying to hammer out details. I think eventually we're gonna have to figure out what's the limit of investment, because it's not a blank check. And maybe we're not there yet.
okay, so that was good clarification. Thanks for that question, Steve. So then here's what we're saying. Go back. Put it all on one page. Okay, so we're saying let's take the bottom two out then, if that's the case, and leave it like this. I can't see anybody, so somebody will have.
That's what I heard too, Teddy.
Also, are there any hands up, Scott or Diane?
Steve's is still up, but I think he had his answer.
I'm just noticing that the word all still needs to come out, Teddy, in this draft under 1.2 plus 1.3.
I took it out and I just brought it in. I think. Like that. Okay. I think we got everything covered. So here's what we're saying. Let's go back up here. I try to capture everything. So I'm going to start from the very beginning. Now you tell me if there's areas where we don't align on. So we looked at the fourth draft. So there's going to be a fifth draft now, hopefully the final one. Documents should be made accessible. So that's something that Scott's going to work on. Slide 5, we said there was a letter we sent to the governor and the legislatures. So let's reference that letter in the very first bullet. And then we also can mention it again in the submission, whether it goes by email or by letter. We'll have to see about that. We'll add a slide for current deployment and the comparative piece. So there was a slide 5, we're going to add a slide 6. Now these other ones no longer match after that, but for the moment, we'll keep the same slides.
Yep.
Slide 7, on point 2.3, we said change it to or yet approved. So we'll add that language in. Slide 9, there was a discussion around lack capacity. So we will put in need help, those communities, towns, townships, and cities that need help, not lack capacity. Slide 11, we just had extensive discussion, so this would be what would be in slide 11 now. Slide 12, we will remove that second paragraph on the supply chain issues, but we will make sure to include supply chain issues in the challenges. Slide 13, we will include American Connection Corps, along with Lead Funds of America. That was, you just missed that. Slide 14, we'll update the recommendations from the 2020 report. So those needed to be put in. So Scott and team will work on getting that piece in. Slide 15, there was 2 quotes there. We'll remove the top quote and put in the quote from Benya in there as soon as we get a hold of her. Slide 19, there's a metric around 184,200 households. It's actually 171,000, so we'll actually get the right number included in that slide. Slide 26, around satellites, we'll have to make the change to have improved. Satellites will have improved. We'll remove the second half of that sentence for speculative, and then we'll change the last sentence there to say whether they will be affordable and sustainable is not yet clear. And then we'll include rural statistics from the websites with percentages. And then we just said they need to change some of the stock photos to updated photos.
Roger, got it all. Nice, Teddy. Thank you.
So we kept track.
Yeah.
So with that now, Steve Georgie.
Unless I lost it, are we going to include Diane's recommendation on increasing the cap 5 million on page 11? It was if we got all 180 million.
Yeah, we didn't yeah, we're going back and forth on many things. So that one,
I understood that the clarification that she made about how many projects are going to be coming in the door for the current 70 million, that wouldn't be necessary for this next round, and that Steve's suggestion was that we spend a little bit more time fashioning it so that we could get it right. Did I hear that correctly, so that we wouldn't add that language in this time, or did I not get that?
it wouldn't matter for the next year. I think that's what we said, right?
Yeah, that's what I understood.
For this next round of projects coming in, it wouldn't be, but we can certainly take a look at it. Everybody aligned on that? Okay. Scott, are you sharing something?
Nope.
Okay. Nothing came up. Someone is sharing. Okay, what I wanted to do next is, okay, with that in mind, with those changes in mind, and the draft report you have, are we good to move forward with a vote? Because we're not going to get together again. That doesn't mean you're not going to see this document. Scott's going to make all the updates. We'll update everything. We'll send it out to the group. If you have something that doesn't look right, we can certainly make updates. Obviously, if there's something substantive in there and we need to get back together and have a discussion, we would certainly call a meeting for that. I'd rather not do that. But what I wanted to do right now is vote with the task force members and see if you're aligned with submitting this report, given that we'll make those changes and that there won't be anything with substance that you are that you're against. Yeah, so I think, yes, someone is sharing. That's Steve is sharing. Is that what you said, Mark?
Yeah, it's Steve G's screen.
If there's a way for me to. Okay, there we go. Perfect. Okay, so with that, let's Diane, maybe I'll let you go through the roll call and then see if you have say yes or no if you approve with the changes going in. Would you approve with this report we submitted at the end of this year?
All right. Teddy Bickelli.
Yes.
Nolan Cowthen.
Yes.
Yvonne Caraveau.
Yes.
Dale Cook. Steve Fensky.
Yes.
Steve Georgie.
Yes.
Jason Hollanday.
Yes.
Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Bernadine Joslin.
Yes.
Brian Crambier.
Yes.
Micah Myers isn't on the call. Teresa Sunday.
Yes.
Jim Wycombe.
Yes.
Paul Wirtz.
Yes.
Dave Wolf.
Yes.
All right. Dale Cook, is he on? Okay.
He's not on. So officially, awesome. Thanks, everyone. The report will move forward, but again, with the caveat that we make all those updates, and yes, you'll get a chance to review it one more time. We'll also kind of circle back with Micah and Dale to kind of get their feedback and input. With that, though, thank you so much for all the work and the patience, right? So we went through some sticky points and good discussions, and I know it's not easy on virtual, but, we got here. Teresa, you had a comment?
Thank you, Scott Cole. This looks like a really good report. You put a lot of effort into it and a lot of coordination, so I really want to thank you.
You're very welcome, all of you, for the contributions that every one of you made to make it better.
Yeah, no, thank you, Teresa, for that comment. Yeah, to reiterate, Scott, that was this was super helpful and easy to follow. And even some of the areas where we had discussions or slight disagreements, it's how the clarity of the report is really what led to that, which is good. That's exactly what we want. And I forget who said it earlier, but it will be a really easy document to use for us to reference and have discussions with the legislators, something they can easily comprehend and pick up and not have to get lost into the wording. So that was super helpful and super awesome. So
yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Any last comments, questions, or concerns from the task force?
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Any questions or comments or concerns from anyone else on the call that's not on the task force? So it'd be the time to come off mute and make a comment if you have any. Okay. And Steve, looks like you have a comment.
I just want to thank you, Teddy, for coordination. Not an easy task in all of these online meetings and stuff, and trying to pull us all together. I appreciate everybody's patience with me, and I think we got a good report, and hopefully the legislature will pay attention to it. But thanks, Teddy. You did a great job.
No, thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody's commitment and push. Continue pushing because that just makes it better. And obviously, the work starts now, right? So we produce the report, we get to use this report over and over and over again. So that's why we want to make sure that all the stuff we have in there is accurate and also representative of what we believe. So, which I think it is. So, with that, as Teresa said, happy holidays to everyone. We enjoy the time off, disconnect, spend some time with family. And we'll get back together at the beginning of the year and just expect to see some more updates by email coming forward through the end of the year.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care, everyone.